everybody. It is Mike Levin on Saturday, April 10th, 2021. And it's about 7 a.m. and I'm on I-80 again, driving back to Pennsylvania. I am going to see my daughter's first soccer game this season. So I'm playing soccer dad. I'll be taking her back home after the game. And what a wonderful way to get the weekend started. And it does make me thoughtful, I have to say, being on this really wonderful stretch of road, on this unobjectionable commute with very little traffic, not during traffic hours. And I think to myself how my dad did a similar drive in and out of New York City, or I should say a commute, because he took the train for part of the trip, every day of the week, not the weekends, but for 13 years, for, what he said was about an hour in and an hour out. But after having made drives and commutes like this for a while, I know it was really more like 2 hours in for my dad, driving from the suburbs of Philadelphia to 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, and then he took the Amtrak to Penn Station around 30th Street in New York City, and then he, I guess, walked from there to the Fabric District. And walk I actually did quite a few times. My commute while living on New York City had taken me for some time to the 30th Street exit and through a walk through both the Flower and the Fabric District to get to work. And around this season, when things started blooming, that was literally very heady with all the pollen hitting you. And I had some years in my life where I had the amazing experience of having experiences similar to my dad with the New York commute. Never exactly similar, because I never commuted to New York from Pennsylvania, although that might start a little bit once lockdown is over. I'll probably try and get into the office about once a week. I am still a New York, Manhattan person. I've made it there, and I can make it anywhere. And with the lockdown stuff gradually coming to an end, thanks to the many vaccines from different companies from around the world, showing just how much of an age of miracles we live in, and the positivity of human capabilities, quite the opposite of the naysayers, end of times type people who are like, look at all the bad stuff. I'm like, wait a minute. We've had pandemics many times before in human history. The thing that makes it different today, well, in addition to global travel, which actually pumps up the dangerousness quite a bit, we also have global drug companies, highly profit-incented, and plenty of people who are humanitarian-incented as well out there, working on this problem. We have what amounts to a global digital network, be it your Apple phone offering to do exposure tracking, or your Android phones informing you just through alerts, and even things like Twitter and notifications being pushed out to your phone are all part of the global digital network. Although my respect for Twitter has been, gradually declining over the years, as I realize it's just a way to boot the digital nervous system. It's the really small, fast information core electrical signals of the nervous system, and not the more rich, instructive, but slower endocrine chemical signals of the, endocrine nerve system in your body, which is comprised of neurotransmitter signals, chemicals, the slow chemical communication in your body that takes place from electrical signals hitting all your different glands in your body that can secrete neurotransmitters. So every mood you have with a real Twitter-like electrical system in your body, reaching a much slower but more information-rich relay system that can send out chemical messages so your local body parts from that gland know to respond correctly. An adrenaline rush from a fight or flight response is a common example, which so often in modern life comes across as anxiety because that high energy adrenaline rush, or there's another neurotransmitter, I always forget the name, it's not always adrenaline, but I gotta Google these and get these names straight. Happiness isn't just a chemical, but the chemical part of the happiness equation is quite important. You probably can't particularly experience happiness without also having the serotonin or dopamine or choose your neurotransmitter signal present. However, chemistry does not cause happiness. It's a matter of what you're doing in life, your conditions, the way you're thinking about things, being in sync, being copacetic with your essential vibe, with your hardware, with the 22 chromosomes that got chosen to comprise your body from the moment of conception, from your mother and father, when 22 up to 23 chromosomes spun like a Russian roulette game, landing on either mom or dad 22 times. And then the last time was an X or Y chromosome, which determined your sex. So that's why your traits come in bundles. That's why you don't share just single distinctive features from your mom or dad, but you share bundles of distinctive features. And so that's your hardware, and you don't have much to say about that. It's a matter of fate. However, I don't believe your essential being, yourself, your spark of light is actually in you as a result of your hardware. That's the software that starts being created, let into this world from the moment the hardware is instantiated. And unlike the hardware we know in technology today, instead of like most of the hardware we know in technology today, instead of a operating system and software and apps having to be loaded in externally, you are born with a certain amount of generational, instinctual software, a la Dune, but without the experience memories, but knowing to be scared of vile-looking creatures, vicious, mean-looking creatures that are in no way vile, vicious, or mean. There's nothing mean about a venomous snake or a bird of prey or a large predatorial cat. They have all just adopted the ambush predator strategy template for living, having an efficient way of acquiring highly built up energy fast, shortcuts to dense sugars, dense proteins, and all the things a growing and healing body needs to make more of itself and to get bigger and stronger. When you're an ambush predator, which is a strategy that's, everywhere in nature. You see it in fish, you see it in frogs and amphibians, you see it in reptiles as basically reptiles' main hunting strategy. And then you occasionally see it in mammals. Mammals are oftentimes above the lower or more base nourishment strategies of being an ambush predator through social groups of 6, 30, whatever have you, these colonies of animals which support higher degrees of specialization within the colony, dedicated mothers, dedicated hunters, etc., starts to bring about strategies that are more sophisticated, less base, more derivative than ambush predation, like even just going out to chase after your prey, having enough strength in numbers, like pack animals, wolves would be a great example of that. Wolves are social animals, although they still have sort of that slick, long, aerodynamic look of a reptile or a cat or other ambush predators. They have started to give up that behavior for increased opportunity to specialize within the social group. And then you have caste systems, alphas and betas within the tribe, because not everyone can be the leaders, and social pyramid type structures and hierarchies start to come into existence there. And generally it allows more procreation, more acquiring of resources, more success. And so through natural selection, for the first time in history, less specialized and more generalized and more social animals get to propagate and have their turn. But the more basic behaviors are always lurking down there right under the surface. It's probably fair to say that almost all social creatures, mostly mammals, are still born with the ambush predator instincts really just below the surface as a backup program if second stage mammal programming doesn't occur. So first stage mammal programming is genetic. It's the stuff that you're born with. It's generational memory. It's why venomous things look mean and why spoiled food smells bad. You just know instinctively to keep yourself safe. You pull back from the edge of disaster in all the most obvious cases, according to the 80-20 rule. Fear of heights. There's a long list of things that you don't need to be taught. And this applies in different ways, to different degrees, to all forms of life in animals. This generational coded in memory is there. This also does, by the way, provide a default program in life, I say as I'm driving down a highway, based on instincts, based on things which work a lot like muscle memory, the almost non-trained, non-cultivated muscle memory. The muscle memory you're born with is always there, helping you to walk when you need to walk, helping you to talk when you need to talk, but not necessarily teaching you how to read and write. Literacy is where that edge of instinctual behavior breaks off. If you're not lifted up, a rising tide does not lift all boats when it comes to second stage hardware programming of humans. I would dare say it applies to animals in general, which is why animals are a type of technology. And when we brought probably dogs first into our life for protection during the night and a garbage disposal, we started mastering some high-tech, ye old high-tech domestication of dogs. Two very important functions: barking at night as the alarm, and cleaning up the scraps that people discard after eating around them. The dog food pyramid, everything. And then of course that attracts vermin, and disease sets in especially as humans start to settle down and not move so much. When you stay in one place for any long period of time, all the bugs and the vermin and the rats and the mice really start to set in. And that attracts your cats. Another second phase technological piece, not born into us as genetics, but very much brought into our lives through, after birth activities, training. Even today, dogs often need to be trained, but not as much as cats, because dogs integrate into the tribe very easily. Cats are still basically the strongly independent, ready to go feral, ready to do ambush predation out on their own without a tribe or a social unit, kind of animal that they are, even as a domestic house cat. So cats, contrary to popular wisdom, are the ones that need to be trained even more than dogs if you want them to be cuddly, friendly, human companions for their life. And I certainly did that with my main cats of the past 20 years or so, Billy and Sammy, both of which have passed away over the past number of years, whose void has been filled with Charlie, who overlapped Billy and Sammy for a great number of years. Charlie is up in age. He's about a 14-year-old, scrappy little old fellow. And Linny and Charlie and Linny are now the two little kitties I know. This Two Little Kitties song has been adapted from Billy and Sammy to Linny and Charlie and Linny. And it works very well, and the love that our lives are filled with these this pair of cats is as looms as large in our mind and our world as with the last two cats, Billy and Sammy, who really shaped my life when I came to New York. They were my New York kitties. They helped me plot my course, where I lived, when and who I married. As they aged, Sammy got diabetic and needed special care as I went off to bring Addie to VidCon in 2018 to Anaheim in California. And I got a cat sitter who took care of my diabetic cat, Sammy. So while Billy brought in, I guess, my first major relationship in New York City, Sammy brought in my second major relationship in New York City, and the woman I'm married to today, even though now we're out in Pennsylvania. That brings me full circle again, back to this commute. On occasion, I commute into New York City on the weekends, the minority of the time, for the love of seeing and picking up my kid, to bring her back to where I have a house, a fireplace, a rope swing, a huge outdoors. I'll probably be getting a trampoline again this year. I got one last year, but it didn't work out too well because of the personality types of the New Yorkers who occupied the Catskills colony out where I had a place, because I love the mountains. I love the little cottage in the mountains feeling. I grew up like almost in the middle of the woods in the suburbs, in an idyllic setting. It was a row of, large, almost McMansion houses in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, only about a half hour outside of Philadelphia. But back in the 70s, it was really even the 60s when my dad was looking at me. But in the 60s and 70s, before these suburban areas of Philadelphia were overbuilt with suburban sprawl, you can't even drive through Ridge Pike during rush hour anymore. The neighborhood is almost unrecognizable and is the definition of, congested suburban sprawl. First, Philadelphia got popular as an alternative hipster destination for people priced out of New York, the same way that Newark is going through the same thing. And I guess Camden, New Jersey, Newark and Camden, because of their proximity to Philadelphia and halfway point between Philly and New York. Those are being lifted. Rising tide lifts all boats. A lot of the areas between Philadelphia and New York City, and Conshohocken, beyond Philadelphia, going out to the suburbs, to the really high-tech employer chain that exists out there on, what is sometimes known as the 202 corridor, the high-tech 202 corridor, which included Great Valley for Great Valley products, for the old Commodore and Amiga buffs who remember the Great Valley products. That was part of that stretch, but so was Commodore itself as part of Westchester, Pennsylvania, as you continue to drive out 202. And this was on a line from the main line. This is all really interesting, these places I grew up. I start out by thinking I was in the middle of nowhere. I was in the middle of nowhere in the boondocks of Philadelphia in Hickville. But in actuality, I grew up in a very historic location. Valley Forge is near there. And the locations I'm talking about are generally the first suburbs in the United States. So Philadelphia came as a built-up area before New York City. And so the suburbs of Philadelphia, the wealthy built-up suburbs of Philadelphia came before the wealthy built-up suburbs of New York City. So as famous as things as Long Island and the 7 towns or the 5 towns are in New York City and Westchester, that Westchester, the other Westchester of Pennsylvania is part of, or the very end, I should say, of the main line, the first railroad train that was built in the United States from the city to the suburbs for pretty much the express purpose of rich people commuting. And out there you've got a river called the Schuylkill River, and on one side of the Schuylkill River you've got this train line, the main line. I think it was either the R6 or the R7 or the R5, I forget exactly which R it is today. But that's the rich side of the river. You drive out along Route 30 or Lancaster Pike. It takes you from my alma mater, Drexel University, right in the middle of West Philadelphia where it starts, out through, let's see, Drexel Hill, which is still maybe part of Philadelphia, more or less. I had some great friends growing up there. Bill Prescott, one of the co-presidents of the Amiga user group. So that starts right in Drexel University's campus, West Philadelphia, where Will Smith was born, and where I had to buy a Macintosh, my first Macintosh, to go to school at Drexel University, even though I could emulate the Macintosh on my Amiga 1000 at the time using an AMAX emulator, with copied Macintosh ROMs from a friend of mine, Howard Harrison, who copied Mac ROMs for me while I was in high school. Came to my electronics class, gave a guest talk there. That might have been how I even met him, with my electronics instructor, Doc Scholl, or it was Mr. Scholl, I guess we called him Dr. Scholl. I was a little mean, but Mr. Scholl had Howard Harrison come in. He showed us about electronics, reprogramming EEPROMs. I was like, oh, you can reprogram EEPROMs? Can you make me a Mac ROM? And bam, I was running the old black and white square pixel Mac on my color Amiga 1000 in non-square pixel 640 by 480 mode on my Amiga, pulling down the screen to reveal the still running Amiga operating in the system in the background. It would completely blow Mac people's minds. So I got hired by Commodore at about this time too. So this Lancaster Pike, this Route 30 that runs between Drexel University and the rich suburbs of Philadelphia was my drive, which I drove down in my refurbished Mustang convertible back and forth, commuting between school, where I was on a 5-year co-op program being allowed to work for Commodore. And Commodore Computers, the makers of the original world's most popular home computers, set a lot of records, probably broken now by Apple, the most computers ever sold by a single computer company of a single model, the Commodore 64. Probably the iPhone in its various models has broken that record these days, but certainly it was amazing times, and I was joining at the late end of it. I did not get to see the legendary Jack Tramiel having his jacket attacks in the halls of the building that has now been bought by QVC. I think the cable channel QVC now owns that Commodore facility in Westchester. Is it something like 1,200? Geez, I can almost remember the name of the road with the speed bumps and the ongoing comical interplay of the engineers and the company regarding the speed bumps. I think they were actually removed. So the Commodore engineers are the type of people who can come in and remove a concrete speed bump during the night. The Commodore engineers are also the type of people who burned their original CMOS processors, custom processors for their computers in the late 70s from sand, drawing it with ruby lith on the floor of a large room to photo reduce it down into their chips. So Apple's producing the M1 in factories that they're licensing the technology from ARM, and they're licensing the manufacturing from TSMC. Oh, I gotta get that right. And they're licensing this from here and that from there. And sure, the designs are their own, but it is still not as fully integrated, as fully deeply integrated as Commodore was back in its day. And this is what I was a part of when I was 18 years old, and I thought it was going to be my life. I got put on this takeoff trajectory where I was the 18 years old coming in as a student intern with free run of the Commodore building thanks to Mark Rifkin, my dear friend who got me my first job there. He's like, "You work here in the burbs of Philly, come work for Commodore, how could you not?" This was reinforced by my buddy Ed Flacco, who, while not working for Commodore, was the one who got me my original Amiga 1000 hot from the tech school after its disk drive broke and it was closeted and ready to be thrown out. So I started doing this drive up to Commodore. Although I didn't take Lancaster Pike in these early days, I took the highway 202 of the high-tech corridor back and forth to Commodore, and later realized when I started going to school at Drexel, because working for Commodore came a few months before going to school at Drexel. I was accepted, and I knew I was going to be at Drexel before I started working at Commodore, but then I switched from driving my Mustang convertible to school every day on my commute, picking up some of these hot girls in the morning. Esther Kim, oh my God, the opportunities I missed in high school. I was, in fact, this, too cool for you kid who always had my interests that I know people looked at from the outside, like, what drives this kid? And from the inside, I was probably very desperately lonely, looking for more affection than I was receiving at home. On the home front by this time, my nuclear family had fallen apart. My parents got divorced. My mom had moved out and alternately moved back in, not to remarry, but lived in the basement. But then she moved out to Ardmore, took an apartment there, made me, I guess, significantly aware of the main line as I went to visit her there. And so as I started working for Commodore, it really got put together for me in my mind how everything fit together. How there was this, it wasn't just Lancaster Pike, that was the bigger old ancient highway type thing. But there was also Montgomery Avenue, which was the richer, smaller road where the real mansions were. So I often made a point of zigzagging to Montgomery Avenue where they didn't want you driving through. So then I would drive from Drexel University, where, you know, it got depressed. It wasn't quite north of Philly where the gangs lived and ruled, the place where the police were feared to go. But it was West Philly, which was still a little rough. So I left Drexel. There was all college students and Penn students. University of Pennsylvania was there too. Driving out in my Mustang convertible, top down, through the rough neighborhoods of West Philly, passing the Philly Zoo, and then out through Drexel Hill, a really mysterious area of Philadelphia where I had friends and I knew people there, but otherwise it was a complete mystery. It reminded me of North Philly, which was the same thing. Part of Philly, I had friends there, but in all other ways it was a complete mystery to me why anyone would go there, live there. And I had relatives there, my Aunt Natalie. And so I got used to these weird satellite communities of Philadelphia. Drove through Drexel Hill, from Drexel, drove through Ardmore, Bryn Mawr, Bala Cynwyd, on Montgomery Avenue, the Lower Merion School District, or Upper Merion, excuse me, very rich, one of the richest school districts in the world, one of the places where the per capita income is greater than 90210. And I got a kick out of reminding myself that I wasn't really in the boondocks of the world. I was in the extremely recognized part of the world, the extremely less known than New York City, always having New York envy. Having a world-class one thing in every case where New York had a world-class multiple things, you see. So that gets into your head, where for every one thing that's really cool about where I lived growing up in Philadelphia, there were 10 equivalent cool things in New York City. We had the Philadelphia Zoo, they had the Bronx Zoo, and all the other zoos, part of the Wildlife Foundation out there, which I joined, and I actually bounced between the aquarium and the Bronx Zoo and the Manhattan Zoo. So I actually took advantage of all these world-class things when I did move to New York City, at least the ones I cared about growing up. And then my kid got to be 9 years old, 10 years old when she could really enjoy it, and bam, lockdown occurred. So free to move around in Pennsylvania with the power of a car and the power of easy driving and big open spaces was more valuable to me than the power of world-class take your choice that you couldn't visit or only just caused anxiety to visit. So I used my suburban superpowers to get more power for the dollar. Still renting, but now I'm renting a little house that has all the amenities that I enjoyed, that imprinted on me growing up. And just like my parents sold my house that I grew up in after the divorce, and most people sell their houses after their kids grow up to college, and you don't need the house that you bought and you moved into for those years you were raising your kid, those 10 or 15, at most 20 years where they're home and you want a nest and you want roots. Instead of that pipe dream, unless you're coveting and pursuing the dream of like British aristocracy where you have an estate that you leave on to your kids with a dream of your kids wanting what your parents wanted, so they'll move into the same house and become like little carbon copies of you or something? No, definitely not for me. I thought it was. I was brainwashed by the post-World War II military-industrial complex, Brady Bunch, ticky-tacky houses social program to think perhaps that is what I wanted. And this now worth probably multiple $1 million house my dad bought in the suburbs of this idyllic community growing up, you can't even drive in and out of on rush hour. You got your sandwich between Conshohocken on one side and Ridge Pike on the other side. If you go that way, you got all the traffic of the people going to Philadelphia in the 202 Tech Corridor. And if you go the other way, you got the traffic of all the people going to the local, school. I guess not during lockdown. It's probably a little easier to drive these days. The last time I was on Ridge Pike, I was like, never again. And so I'm in a different kind of burbs of Philly now. Certainly further away from Philly than where I grew up. I was only 20 minutes away from Philly. Probably I'm about an hour away now. But you don't get that congestion, and you get much more of that mountain feeling that I enjoy. More power for the dollar, lots of green around you. I see deer regularly as I work from my patio outdoors. They almost come up and eat out of my hand. Not quite, but they could if I were to want to go that route. Same with the squirrels. And I do see the occasional bear. I have to fortify my trash cans against the bears at night. And what else do I want to say here? Certainly the direction the world has changed has very much more induced, incited, encouraged me to live this slightly more nomadic lifestyle. I was able to move so quickly when lockdown started, because I was renting on that side. Now granted, it cost me some money to break the lease, and I still really resent the shallow hipster luxury building that price gouged me when it came time to move. I should have gone to month lease, but because I didn't, because I renewed with a 1-year lease, they charged me $8,000 to get out of this tiny studio apartment when it came time for me to move, the price of a small car. And they sent their lawyers and their certified letters after me, so I left them a really nasty review, and I paid down every dollar they said I owed them because it was cheaper than hiring a lawyer. So, they price it at just that level, cheaper than hiring a lawyer, but, too expensive to endure as a non-corporate entity. So it's really the painful price gouge that Irby did to me. And so, bad reviews on Google. Companies just can't get away with that kind of stuff anymore. So I paid my $8,000 to get out of New York City and the high density of, the statistically much poorer place to be, considering what's going on, even though my kid ended up still staying there. Although in Staten Island, where one can hope it's a slightly better situation, and she's near beaches and everything, so she gets to get some open environment. In fact, it's a soccer game I'm going to see her at now, but I certainly made an environment where she could hop over to instantly and have an experience much like the one I had growing up, as an alternative to the much more crammed one that's occurring now in urban environments. I continue to keep that up, and the price, of course, everything has a price. I wish I was independently wealthy by this time. I made many foolish mistakes. However, I'm very happy with my life, and I would not be living the life. I would not have taken the path I'm on had I not made those foolish mistakes. So I would for sure be living comfortably on interest from investment income by now, and have greater freedom about where to live, and be in a stronger position, a shorter commute, seeing my kid. I'm sure I would have still been divorced. No matter how much money you have, you are not free from that event in life, says Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And no matter how much money you have, and thus freedom in where to live and how to live, the corollaries always exist. Even though Bezos is not directly running his company anymore, you know he's not free. You know he's as much of a slave to Amazon as he always was. And Elon Musk, similarly, despite the fact he still controls his companies and has these much more noble dreams than Bezos. I gotta say, Bezos doesn't hold a candle to Musk based on the righteousness of their driving goals. Now, it might be, I don't even know what the psychological effect it would be, but having the, Batman, the poor me drive, the poor little boy drive that drives these poor little boys to achieve to these fabulous levels, which is what happens. The Batman complex is what happens with Steve Jobs. He was adopted. He had these, I believe was Libyan or Syrian parents who were hyper intellectuals, and gotta believe that drove Steve Jobs to, why didn't my natural parents want me kind of amazing levels. There's similar stories behind Bezos, and I'm not even sure what Musk's story there is. I'll have to look into it, but oftentimes it's little boys being rejected by their parents, proving something for the rest of their lives, that drives them to these, superhero, or at least James Bond super criminal levels of achieving that are very much available today, thanks to the technology hockey stick acceleration curve. Big stuff, big, chances to make moves. It's not like Elon Musk himself was an engineer or an inventor, but he's like, online currency and people paying for stuff online. PayPal will eventually be a thing. In fact, I think he got, one of the X.com, one of the very few one-letter domains of the early days. And X.com, as awesome as it was as a domain name, had these connotations that weren't great, so they went to PayPal, cashed out of PayPal, bought his next company, kept upgrading. Just like my buddy from high school tried to do, not really buddy, he was a friend of me, I almost beat him up, Michael Rubin, who hated the fact that I got that Mustang convertible in high school, was one of those people looking over at me going, yeah, fucking why you? And one time my car broke down, he called me out to a fight when I was going to driver ed class with him. I had recently also ditched my glasses for contact lenses, so for some reason I rubbed Michael Rubin very much the wrong way, and he called me out on a fight. He said something hostile to me, and I was like, anytime, anywhere. It was like, yeah, okay, today after school. So I showed up to that site after school that time, and I stayed for all of about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I was like, you know what? My car's broken. It's in the shop. I'm gonna miss the bus, and I'm gonna be walking home, maybe in really bad shape from a fight. So I made one of those funny decisions that really changed my life. I stopped waiting, and I went and I caught a ride in my normal yellow school bus going home. And as I did, I saw Mike Rubin walking all puffed up with his arms in that Taekwondo position, ready position as he does, walking towards the fight location with his little buddy, his flying monkey buddy that he had at the time. And I was like, oh shit, I just ditched a fight. And that stayed with me for the rest of my life. He grew up to become one of the world's richest people on the Forbes list for a brief time. Fell off that list, but right now probably very much has that same kind of financial freedom that I covet, that I walked away from several times for several reasons over my life. I've got, I don't even know what you want to call it. If I had good son syndrome and continually being there for my mother, that contributed to it. As my dad died and I took over his check cashing business, which derailed my immediately after college days. Being there for my dad, such as it were, the executor of his estate, which made me in the crosslights of some very nasty people. I was there again for my mom, as she went crazy and disappeared multiple times and really yanked young me around in ways that were, at least contributing factors to other bad mistakes I made in my life. Good son syndrome. I was plagued by it many times. My Mustang convertible got driven into and totaled by a 16-year-old, 15-year-old maybe, who just got his driver's license and was out on a ride with his buddies. And basically totaled my Mustang convertible in my last year of high school. And so those were really the only few commutes I did out to Commodore in those days in my Mustang convertible right before I started for college. Wait, no, so college and yeah, all through college. After I graduated college, my dad died within 2 weeks. My Mustang was totaled by that time, and I was driving a little Subaru station wagon, which kind of, but sort of, re-invoked this rugged feel that I was going for, that the Mustang had as a muscle car, and these Subaru wagons that I guess evolved into the Outback these days kind of sort of projected. But I didn't have that very long, and I went on to a red Nissan Pathfinder, which is very much like my red Jeep today, and started my history of red armor. Red armor is nice for soft blue circles like me who find themselves thrown into the world of the green arrows, where you have to be good, you have to be always on, you have to be in a competitive environment, playing the game of people who dedicate themselves to the hyper competitive landscapes, environments, games. People like Mike Rubin, who dedicate themselves to, becoming like the richest in the world over things like that. Whereas opposed to me, where it's like the journey is the reward. But where the journey was the reward with Steve Jobs, who referred to people like Larry Ellison as my rich friend, it was never about money to Steve Jobs. It was never about money to me, but I am no Steve Jobs. And like I said in previous videos, I am no Dennis Ritchie or Ken Thompson or Linus Torvalds or Guido van Rossum, the people for whom it's not about money either, but for whom the journey is the reward, and who've actually achieved the levels of things that they would have maybe dreamed to set out to achieve. I don't covet the money of the financial achievers. I covet the world-changing, the modest world-changing power and marks that have been made on the world for good, for the positive of humanity, for contributing to the free and open source of human information that Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie did, that Linus Torvalds followed suit on, that Guido van Rossum followed suit on, and now the tools for making tools, as imperfect as they may be, but the tools for making tools, the means of production that are in all of our hands. And I feel a little bit bad for, with all that, not having filled in any of the gaps that I totally know are there. What are the gaps? Well, free and open source Flash, a Flash vector-based program in the free and open source world, to B, to flash what Blender has become to 3D. Blender is 3D software that was from the proprietary world that was volunteered back into the free and open source world as Maya and 3D Studio Max and all these other software packages really dominated the paid proprietary 3D world. So Blender threw it into open source. Scala, my alma mater after Commodore, could have done that with their Scala, with their Amiga-based digital display software, but they chose not to do that because, their draconian sysadmin guy convinced the president at the time that would undermine 95 South I want, which will be remerging back into here soon. And so Scala became a very minor player in the digital signage industry, from not taking my advice over the years, from not having me more closely involved in the decisions that mattered. And so what I did while I worked for Scala after Commodore was rigged their whole content management system into a lead generation machine with almost more force than they knew how to handle, and sales leads, valid, good pre-qualified sales leads, that all it took was an inside sales team to say, yeah, this is good, it requires follow-up, and this was bad, was so voluminous that it broke the old company's not invented here personality, where you had to be either one of the old Commodore engineers or from among a very tight-knit group of people who might as well have been Commodore engineers. They might have come from other outlying Commodore spin-offs, but they were the tech elite of Scala, and they made all the decisions, and basically never succeeded on their own. Ended up being acquired by another company, I forget its name, Stratosphere or something, but a more general out-of-home information company, out-of-home advertising, outernet stuff, which subsumed mere digital signage, which was one part of that solution, which is what Scala tried to sort of morph itself into, but not in time. It was never a big enough market. I think they were in that $50 million a year space that never let you mature, capped out, diminishing returns. And when they tried to expand that, they couldn't consolidate the rest of the world's out-of-home marketing business because everything was custom all the time. It required a digital reseller network, and Scala's reseller network, their value-added software network, their value-added retailer network, was more important in the acquisition than the technology. That Strata company wanted Commodore's or Scala's resellers more than they even wanted the technology. The piece that I built up with my web systems, I was getting a percentage of company net profits before the waters were so poisoned by these not invented here Commodore engineers that took over Scala so badly that it was just unviable for me to even stay there amongst those people, feeling daggers jabbed in my back all the time whenever I commuted into work, something that you still had to do in those days to such a large extent. I was commuting an hour in and an hour out of the suburbs. I was doing the reverse commute of the suburbs. Just in order to get to a company that I was clearly not so very welcome in. So this is where I'm going to wrap up. It's probably a pretty negative spot to wrap it up there, but suffice to say, it all went very positive. When I moved to New York to sort of escape the daggers being stabbed in my back, even though I was putting the company on such a good direction, I entered the agency world, which was a different kind of poison for my soul. So, SEO, skin in the game, walking the walk so I could talk the talk that I was doing at Scala in the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, 2004, morphed into walking the walk so I could talk the talk in agency world, you see, in New York City, where I was, where I made Hittail, Web 2.0 application, so I could still walk the walk and talk the talk, but I never owned it. It never actually belonged to me. So I was unable to continue walking the walk. So when I ended up just talking the talk, it was so incredibly frustrating to me that I ended up, and this was also when I got divorced. The frustration was mounting on frustration was mounting on frustration. And then I had another 2-hour commute inside New York from one tippy top end in Inwood, upstate New York essentially, to the very lower part of New York in Staten Island, 2 hours driving in New York just to see my kid. So I said, if I'm going to drive 2 hours inside New York just to see my kid, wouldn't it be much better to drive? I'm going to be driving through New York City. You're going to see some interesting sights. I was an hour ahead of time to get to the soccer game. Made a bit of a wrong turn and ended up taking the George Washington Bridge, which puts me on either I-95 or Manhattan. So I just drove into Manhattan. You're going to be seeing someone drive comfortably through Manhattan on the West Side Highway an hour ahead of time for my kid's soccer game. It's only 8 o'clock, and I don't have to be there until 9 o'clock. Yeah, I'm an hour ahead. This is so awesome. So you'll see, for people who stayed with me through this hour talk so far, you're going to get the added little bonus of seeing me drive through my old haunt, right? This could have been a very highway, suburban, New Jersey suburban-like drive, but you're going to see the Intrepid go by on my right. You're going to see the Trump Towers, maybe through this tiny little thing here. I'm not even sure how much you're going to get to see. 158th Street. This is fun. What a nice way to do this when you're ahead of time. Maybe I psychologically did it on purpose. But there you go. Even when you're working in automatic on muscle memory, this was a mistake that could have been terrible had it been during any sort of rush hour. Driving down the West Side Highway of Manhattan during rush hour, you could have easily lost an hour if there was a traffic incident. But I'm not going to. This misty morning. Okay, so I have time to finish this. I thought I was going to wrap up my video quick. So if you stayed with me through this whole hour, by the time, let's see, how old was I at these times? When I graduated college, of course, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I died when, my dad died when I was about 21. There's a Freudian slip. I died. My spirit started to get crushed when I was around 21, and my dad died, and Commodore went out of business, and my mom went crazy for the first time, and I followed my heart to move to the Washington, D.C. area to work for Scala. Brought them back onto track, turned them profitable, poisoned the waters for myself, got out. So that was in D.C., and I moved back to Philadelphia when my mom went crazy. Continued working for Scala for 4 more years in their Pennsylvania facilities, which were there because Commodore was in Pennsylvania, in the burbs of Philly. So about 4 years in Virginia, and then about 4 years in Philly, and then waters so poisoned I had to leave, moved from Philly to New York City, got my 2 cats, got married not too long after that because one of my cats, Billy, made my ex fall in love with me, and then many years later moved to Staten Island, now being back directly on staff for someone who needed SEO directly. So I went from walking the walk and talking the talk in agency world. Hittail wasn't mine, so I couldn't walk the walk anymore. I did not have the energy left over to make some new venture. I tried a few times. I tried with Linux as a containerized virtual machine ages before Docker, and not requiring an install, ages ahead of VMware and VirtualBox in their own way. You just popped the USB into your drive, or brought up a Dropbox, double-clicked an icon, and whether you were on the desktop of a Mac or a Windows machine or another Linux desktop, a full little Linux server would run in QEMU without admin privileges, and you could do stuff there. It had a full repo, and I used scripts to build, apps, network applications out of the repo for web serving, and I was like super efficient with it, using like bbox as my, or busybox as my command. So it was like 500K for the Unix commands portion, and then another 500K for a web server. I think I used the busybox web server. They have their own, and then just a few other little things to have a basic web appliance that people could kick the tires of, with a 20 megabyte download that expanded into about 60 megabytes. It gave you, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, like the platform I was advocating. That was around 2012, 2013. And around that time, I unboxed the first Raspberry Pi on YouTube. That was very popular. I got over 1 million views from that. And it was very clear to me that I just had little to no time left over in my life for things. So that was my attempt with Linux to do something noteworthy that I could, build a website presence up around. And then I tried again with Pipulate, and I was too ambitious. I tried building the server piece of Pipulate, and then I realized Pipulate is just generic free and open source software for SEO that let you build all the standard things every, heavily technically leaning SEO has to build at some point in their career. A way to dump the data out of Google Search Console, a way to do search engine results scraping and position tracking, and content management systems. All kinds of stuff was possible under Pipulate. Recreations of stuff I had created separately many times in previous lives under languages as diverse as TCL, often called Tickle. I did it once. I did it under 2 versions of VBScript, early VBScript and later VBScript, which was Visual Basic Scripting Edition, which ran on Active Server page. I did it once under HTX/IDC, a precursor to Active Server page. This is how long ago I was doing it, in like 97, 98, when Microsoft's offerings to do stuff was on the web was a basic template system, which is again reminiscent of Django and things that are not Django the whole, but Jinja, the Jinja templates that are out today. which are extractions from the Jenga project, which is more indicative of the type of generalized systems I've made in the past. I've made things like Jenga and Ruby on Rails and re-implemented over the years to create the suite of SEO products that are always required. Pipulate was my attempt to do that fully in the free and open source world without doing anything of it as work for hire for previous employers, which had been my mistake with Hittail, so that I could own it and feel the love for it and put the tender love and care in for it over the years. But the rub there was that I just did not have the time, the energy left over, where my dad had the 2-hour commute each way in and out of New York City every day, plus the house and the mortgage and 2 kids and an adopted kid. I was the natural kid second after an adopted kid, which I'm told explains a lot about my situation. My dad had tremendous guilt complex and did everything for my sister first before I got anything. So, I bought my own car. I had my own job starting from about late 14 years old. I worked illegally for Superfresh as a cart boy to make money to restore my car that I bought at 15 years old before I could legally drive it. So I was always pushing the edge, reaching for those boundaries, and often in the realm of hardware and technology, and often with an old school undertones. So I got a Mustang convertible. My dad had a Thunderbird, a T-Bird convertible. So I had followed in his footsteps also a little. He bought it used, but then years later hated Ford and never bought a new Ford in his adult life, never bought a new car in his adult life, always bought used and cheap. So I followed in my dad's footsteps. I never bought a Ford again because of their helping the Germans invade Poland during World War II. Might not have happened early in the war had Henry Ford not helped Hitler. So once I came to the realization about corporate personalities, I decided I too would probably not buy a Ford, and certainly not a new one in my life. So I bought this 2013 Jeep Wrangler. Much more suits my vibe. I had a red Nissan Pathfinder in the past. I thought that suited my vibe, but then I realized that Nissans were for douchebags. Maybe not so much then. They had a good vibe. I got involved in the Nissan car company when it was Datsun. My dad had several Datsuns growing up, and it was always the better car for the money. And those, Japanese and Korean car manufacturers tend to start out that way, give better value for the money, focus on quality, and then become the douchebag car manufacturer. You saw that happen with Datsun as they became Nissan and put out that fateful Ultima commercial that, pulls all the, that kind of personality to the Nissan Altimas now these days. And you see it reflected in the drivers of a lot of their other quirky cars that are just so different, designed to really stand out. And so I decided to get the car that helped win World War II and other wars for the United States. I decided to get the car that helped beat Hitler and has a 50-year history. And some might say, but it was owned by the Germans. Daimler Chrysler owned, Mercedes-Benz. Daimler owned Chrysler for a bit, so it had the Germans, yes. But Jews have Germans in them too, from the diaspora. You can't help German influence. And they do pay attention to quality, despite the fact their social morals might have a propensity to get out of whack. And they know how to build cars, so Chrysler in general and Jeep in particular very much enjoyed a big quality build. Jeep did well for passing through Mercedes-Benz for a little while. And as a perfect, symbol of the vibrating edge of what's okay and what's bad, how long can you hold a grudge, the Fiat, the Italians now own Chrysler. and by extension Jeep. So Jeep Wrangler, the beloved tribal cliquey vehicle of, you know, the Hulk of the cars. When we talk about superhero analogies with cars with my daughter, plenty of cars are built to be sleek and fast and to get around and to not hold much. But Jeeps are designed to be big and strong, so they're more like the Hulk of cars. And then we get into game theory. You're either small and fast, or you're a lumbering bruiser. And how in game theory, the coveted but seldom achieved character is both fast and big and strong. The lightning bruiser is often sought after because they can use both strategies, which are normally compensation strategies, to make up for being small, you're fast, and to make up for being big, you're strong. For being slow and lumbering, you're strong. So the most coveted characters in game theory and video game design is the lightning bruiser. So one thing we can do when you're someone like me. Okay, so let's get to the green arrow and blue circle talk. One way of looking at life, especially among males who feel the responsibility of making it, and the ones who have to want to think that they're bringing home the bacon, they're fulfilling the role of the hunter in the family or social unit, which maybe through brainwashing, maybe through the Brady Bunch, ticky-tacky house, military, industrial complex, American dream, post-World War II agenda, got brainwashed into believing I have the responsibility for supporting certainly anyone I take into my life, certainly any children I have, and to build a unit which is reminiscent of that, 20 to 30 people social tribe that Homo sapiens nomadically traveled with. But it's not true. We got broken up into smaller units. The degree of responsibility shoveled onto the shoulder of fewer, usually males, became much higher. It caused great levels of stress. The backlash was during World War II, with all the men away. The women were needed for industrial capacity. It taught them that they could also do stuff. So the funny thing is, after the war was over and the GI Bill put all the men to work on these social programs, many of the women stayed working, but all this did was put more stress on the home. So now both parents had to work to make enough money to support 2 or maybe 3 kids, 2.5 kids, which is the average. And that was extremely out of whack. High stress, high pressure. It created the rat race and the hamster wheel. And that was just fine with the people at the top of the pyramid. See, the social pyramid people like this because you put the people who could upset the social pyramid, people who have disruptive abilities like me, at the bottom of the pyramid, born into the bottom, have them stay at the bottom. And then it's easier for them to become, sour grapes, disgruntled, reach 50 by the time they did anything, before they even have the opportunity to do anything. Denial of education and denial of opportunity is a social injustice. People who are born with the raw material for greatness, born into either social situations, social economic conditions, or just circumstances in life that set them back at these main formative years where things happen that shape your life, put you on courses. Everything that follows is a result of those small things. Like Michael Rubin himself says, he wanted to remain old school camel trader when he was doing his, I don't even remember the name of his company, but he got the deal for Toys R Us online toy order fulfillment at a time where I made an online order fulfillment system with my own hands. I coded it for Scala. The guy in charge at the time, Jeff Porter, said, can you do that thing you did with the old intranet, the old HTX IDC files from before there was even really active server pages in much of a web per se. Could you make that system, but today, just bring it back online? And the thing was, there were so many things about that were wrong in the early days, because IDC HTX was just a lightweight template system like Jinja, and you couldn't do all that, business logic stuff. So I switched it from IDC HTX to active server page and made a generalized system from which I did an extraction, just like, Backpack extracted Ruby on Rails from out of it, 32 signals. I did that same stuff. I just didn't follow through. I didn't market it. I didn't do it on a sexy enough language. I didn't grow the amount I should have grown, having done an extraction like that, seen the greater significance in the industry. It was based on VB script. It would have never been popular anyway. So I had lots of wounds over the years. I backed off of things. When Hittail was work for hire, I backed off of that wound, healed my wounds. When Pipulate never became as popular as it did, I backed off, healed my wounds. When Levinix never became as popular as it could, because I didn't have the time to commit to it, and other things between Docker for the containerized, network applications, and Jupyter Notebook for a server-based environment for running ad hoc apps that could travel seamlessly. And again, it's like Docker between different host operating systems. Between Jupyter Notebook and Docker, there was really no room for Linux. Pipulate, I just went about wrong. I didn't know enough about Python at the time to understand that the build-up libraries were better made building blocks for Pipulate than starting from scratch. I should have started with, say, Pandas. Python's Pandas package is a starting point for Pipulate when their data grid concept, and then processed with the apply method with a data grid. That would have been better for the version 1.0 Pipulate. I'm reworking Pipulate now, so if we're going somewhere, Pipulate isn't quite dead. That is going to be, it was really the third coming of Pipulate, using all the best Python packages for doing it, of which there was one missing. OAuth, the ability to deal with OAuth authentication, was still excessively challenging with the packages I found, or overcomplicated or whatever. So I made one package of my own for OAuth authentication. I'm working on SERPs now. I already did emptying out this search engine console data. I'm bringing SQL back into the picture with SQLite, and so I'm about to go under the battery tunnel, the renamed battery tunnel. And on the other side, I'm going to have to make some quick decisions about where to turn and how to get to Staten Island. I'll have a little bit of highway left to help me make those decisions, but I'll be winding down here pretty good too after an hour and 20-minute talk, starting out in Pennsylvania. Now I'm driving through the business district. I'm passing ground zero now. I don't know if I'm going to turn the camera, it's too dangerous, but I'm passing ground zero in the financial district, and I'm about to go under the Hugh L. Carey tunnel to get to Brooklyn. Fun, right? And it's no big deal. So Philly, and driving the roads of Philly in the 202 corridor, trained me for New York City. New York City is now child's play, and while I might have made some wrong turn, it wasn't even wrong turn. I'm taking a different route. While I'm taking a different route than the one I had actually planned, that kind of stuff is really just no big deal for me anymore, both in terms of directions and muscle memory, and in terms of just comfort level. It's really no big deal. I enjoy this stuff. I enjoy driving. I can process my thoughts in ways that I never really could when I was doing the extremely quick commutes, or no commute at all, waking up and taking a long time getting ready and going to work, putting in as long of a work day as if I commuted, but without the commuting. It's catch up. I'm getting more sleep than I ever did in my life. huge. How awesome is it to get all the sleep you've ever wanted? I've always felt sleep deprived through my life. To take long hot baths without conflicting with other people, to when you finally get around to starting your work, for it not being too late in the day, for the nature of the work being the kind of work you absolutely love, for the collaboration tools to let you collaborate right on the screen where you're seeing the people. It's better than being there in person. You see what you're working on right on the screen. You can both reach up and work on the same screen. You can have more people in the same place and have it feel more personal than spread out around a table with the politics of who's sitting at what seat at the table, what rooms are available for meetings, and just things start to click in terms of knowledge working. So we are fully immersed. Peter Drucker, the consultant from post-World War II, the people who rebuilt Japan from the loser during the war to the high quality, to the symbol of quality it became after the war. Those consultants, Edward Demings, Peter Drucker, have been saying things about how the world is changing, how, total quality management and shorter feedback loops, things that we see reminiscent of today in software practices, continuous deployment, integration and deployment, CI. That's just total quality management. That's just TQM of the olden days of assembly line manufacturing, production, real physical product. So all these things that put all countries other than the United States back on track, with the rare exceptions. You've got things like Harley Davidson coming back from the brink using total quality management. And so you've got all these techniques that are absolutely proven. And then you've got additional things like machine learning getting layered on, especially algorithms like the deep learning algorithm that can show you that they can do spontaneous new things better than experts in the field have been able to do over the years, because just following the data is often better than years of research and familiarity, which can create biases and make you go down false trails. So I'm perched perfectly with all my tools and experience to plunge into machine learning. Still haven't done so yet. That's the self-sabotage I'm doing right now. I've created a package called SEO-ML and MLS SEO alternatively, as I'm experimenting with different versions. And even in that, I have not activated machine learning. So as part of the template work that I'm doing currently in SEO-ML, which is the work that I'll use to rebase Pipulate. I don't want to do it too soon or even fork Pipulate just yet. But once I'm happy with it, I'm going to move that over to the rebasing of Pipulate because of the great name and the stars and the followers it has built up. Say Pipulate is alive again with these following best of breed practices for SEO. The SEO suite everyone has to do. You can run it yourself off of your own laptop, off of Raspberry Pis. You need a place to do ad hoc work in Jupyter Notebook, and you need a place for 24/7 server jobs to run using systemd under Linux. It could be a Raspberry Pi. The more of that you have, the bigger machine learning type jobs you'll be able to work as you map reduce more ambitious jobs over more hardware. But you're going to do just as much by spreading it out over time using things like Dask, so you can always be processing machine learning stuff with your excess capacity. So you don't really need a GPU farm to get started. You'll be able to do it with just your laptop in ad hoc mode under Jupyter Lab or Notebook, with maybe one instance of systemd running under WSL if you're running the Windows subsystem for Linux. Or if systemd doesn't run well under WSL, which is something, a discovery I still have to make, I'll teach you how to get a good 24/7 Linux box running no matter what you have, no matter how. Just, look around your house, you'll have something that you'll be able to get running with a pretty decent repo. The repo will change. The software repository that you use for your 24/7 out of your house Linux box will change based on what that device is. An old laptop you're going to use will be different from a Raspberry Pi you might have bought, will be different from an old tower server. You know, in most cases, some version of a Debian-based Ubuntu will be able to be used, and you'll have the Debian or Raspbian or Ubuntu repository, and you'll be in pretty good shape. You'll be able to install software and build servers with very small modifications to popular scripts. Or you'll be able to run Docker and just not have to build servers at all, but just choose your image. Or just choose your SD card image for a Raspberry Pi, because Raspberry Pis were like Docker before Docker with SD card images, which Norton Ghost was like Raspberry Pi before Raspberry Pi, because you could image hard drives. So, and then chroot was like that before Norton Ghost, because you could switch, you know, what location your operating system is running out of, and once that's separated from your data files, the way Linux does it with all that weird directory structure where people scratch their head and go, what's that about? But it's about decoupling things that need to be coupled so you can pull off things like Docker and virtual machines in good form, with good form. Another reason why those tools and that tooling works so well around Linux and Unix and doesn't work so well around Macs, just plain vanilla Unix, and especially Windows. They say this stuff works well except on Windows, right? That qualification always, except on Windows. Well, Microsoft is taking care of that now with a Windows subsystem for Linux. I have fully embraced it. I've been on the bleeding edge for that, got myself on the fast inside track and then the slow inside track, and now finally my main laptop is not on the inside track anymore, because I like to be just shy of the bleeding edge. I like to take tools that have percolated out and made it through attrition, osmosis, use whatever effect you want to label it, but that have made it to the mainstream world. But the mainstream world does not particularly know how to use it to full effect yet. And that is what has happened with Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, really. Such a profoundly powerful development platform and playback platform, but sub-development platform and sub-playback platform in the same way that the web is a sub-development and playback platform. So I'm really advocating two sub-development and playback platforms, one being Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, mostly through terminal subsystems. Terminal, you know, the text type-in user interface, which can be pretty slick, which can be as slick as web browsers themselves. And then, of course, the web browser as the other subsystem. You master both. You master one with muscle memory because you can Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, fixed locations. And then you master the other, the web-based one, the browser-based one with Node underneath, because you have to. In the same way you have to master regular expressions and other forms of pattern matching and other sub-languages that always get built in and embedded into other languages. And that's just what the whole web subsystem is now. It's just a subsystem like regex that gets embedded into other systems as subsystems. Browsers are subsystems of operating systems for the most part. Chrome OS knows that. And yeah, so I guess I'm going to be stopping there. I'm passing over yet another bridge. You saw me on the George Washington Bridge earlier. Now you see me on the Verrazano Bridge. It's still just 8:30, so I am plenty early. I'll still be there like 15 minutes early. But this is where I wrap up, and I wrap up gracefully. I'm glad I can do it gracefully and not being rushed, and spend my full attention to which exit I'm going to take when I come off of the Verrazano. So this has been one for the history books. A lot of my history, a lot of Commodore and Commodore's history, a lot of history of just the general technology space, parallels between hardware and software, the hardware and software of your body and mind, and the hardware and software of your platforms and extended bodies, and your tools and your tooling, and the thought that goes behind it, and the difference between muscle memory and cognitive, engagement, and the goal of avoiding cognitive engagement. The more you can avoid cognitive engagement on things that in the past would have taken all your attention, the more you've taken advantage of this human body as your platform in this material world. But don't be fully stateful, because you'll be caught unawares by big changes in the world. Become rapidly, statically effective through never stale, dynamic workflows and workflow reevaluations. You use dynamicism to continuously reevaluate your workflows, continuously learn, continuously improve your tools and tooling, occasionally swap out your tools and tooling, but then you use your muscle memory, your static capacity to get better at these little subsystems, these little abstractions, of which even mainstream Linux, Python, Vim, and Git are often a part of, because Python pandas is lives between generic Python that will be around forever and very stateful fashion, hardware platform dependent stuff of the day, technology du jour. So thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.